Welcome to Grief is the New Normal. I'm Dr. Heather Taylor, a licensed psychologist and grief specialist, here to help change the conversation about grief and build community and connection while we all adjust to this new normal we are living in. This podcast is for you if you are grieving or if you are supporting someone in a season of grief. I'm glad you're here. Welcome back, everyone. I am really excited for today's conversation. Joining us, I have Dr. Jessica Rabon. She's a licensed psychologist out of South Carolina. Jessica, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited for our conversation.
So today, Jessica and I, we're going to start talking about what it looks like to have grief during the holiday season and the different ways that can show up in both death and non-death losses, in new traditions, in changed relationship dynamics. Jessica, do you mind introducing just a smidge about yourself and your background?
Absolutely. I'm a licensed psychologist in South Carolina. I work at a children's hospital where I have two different roles. A day and a half a week, I work traditional outpatient in one of our clinics doing therapy with teenagers. So it's our adolescent medicine clinic as well as young adults. And then the other 3.5 days, I work medical inpatient, primarily seeing kids with medical illnesses, physical traumas, as well as some psychiatric illness and eating disorders. I host Psych Talk, which is a podcast. I am the co-host of Welcome to Group Therapy, which is another podcast, and I make mental health content on social media, and that's how we connected. I'm so happy to be here and having this conversation with you.
Let's get into it. When we think about the upcoming holiday season, how do you notice grief impacting the holidays maybe in a different way than during other times of the year?
In my work, I definitely see grief being more pronounced around the holidays, a lot more anxiety about going into the holiday season, especially if it is the first holiday season where a loved one is no longer with them, or thinking about non-death grief, like a divorce. I work primarily with kids and adolescents. If it's the first holiday season where they're having to split time, I see a lot more anxiety than they would experience on a typical Tuesday, so to speak, and just bigger emotions. And if I'm thinking of the kids and teens I work with, whether that be sadness, anger, frustration, and I'm sure we'll get into all the ways grief can manifest.
In thinking about the holidays versus a typical Tuesday, maybe there's been past holiday seasons that had big excitement or fun or magic. Maybe coming into this holiday season, something's changed, either a family dynamic or a health situation. Do you feel like that contributes to part of it?
Oh, absolutely. I think so much of the holiday season is marketed as the most wonderful time of the year.
Right.
Like joy, you use the word magic. And I think when somebody is going through grief, it can be hard to feel those things, or they feel guilty if they do feel those things. It's difficult to reconcile. I'm sad, but I also want to enjoy the holiday season because we have so many Tuesdays in our life, but every Tuesday is different. We usually have traditions around certain holidays or certain memories that we hold. And when somebody's grieving, we know something's going to be different.
Yeah. That also makes me think of the nostalgia factor. My family always did Christmas this way, or we did Hanukkah this way, or when we have these certain meals, these certain rituals, these traditions, these gatherings. And maybe this year it's going to look different, whether someone's passed, whether someone's sick and in the hospital, whether it's a divorce. And I'm thinking of the new Inside Out 2 movie, and they have nostalgia come out, and she can be loud. Like that can be a really big pull to try to cling to things that felt similar when we're grieving and things feel so different. And I feel like that nostalgia pull can lead to disappointment or misunderstanding or fear that I'm never going to have that feeling again.
Absolutely. Well, a thought I had, I don't know why mac and cheese was coming to mind, but like thinking of, oh, grandma used to always make the mac and cheese. Now, who's going to do that to fill the role? And like wanting things to be the same but then they're not the same. I think going into traditions, even in my personal life, working with clients, a lot of us try to keep traditions alive in hopes that maybe it will still feel somewhat the same, even though we know there's a big part that isn't, whether that is a person is missing or, like you said, someone's in the hospital or divorce or whatever the person is grieving. But I think so many of us, when we are grieving, long for some type of familiarity, especially around the holidays. Okay, if we keep this how we've done it every other year, maybe it will feel a little less different or less painful.
Yeah, I think back to that first Christmas after he had passed, and what we always did in our family is a name, like among the cousins, I have a lot of cousins. We would pick people's names at Thanksgiving and then we'd do the individual present. I remember we had to do things differently. We tried to do it that way that first year as soon as, because we would go in age order, and it was once it was Garrett's turn, it felt not okay. And so moving forward, we included everyone in it. We did a big white elephant kind of a thing, not mean, but nice gifts.
Yeah.
And then that's been the tradition ever since. And that's been so much more fun. And we're not going in this age order where we notice the gap. And so it was like, how can we still do this kind of family tradition, gift exchange type thing, but do it in a way that feels better for us moving forward, where we're not forgetting him. We're just lessening the pain of the hole, like that that nothing could fill.
It's so interesting hearing you say that, because after my grandfather died, he died right before my 17th birthday. That first Christmas, we tried to do everything the same. And after that, since then, I guess this will be year 17 doing this. We've done a white elephant ever since. So I don't know why that is like so it just originally started with the adults, then the adult grandchildren were included. Now all my cousins are adults too, so it's become this big thing. But it's so fun when you said white elephant, I was like, is that the Christmas tradition for after a loss? Because that's what we did as well. My grandmother honestly set the boundary. She was like, this is too much for me trying to do everything. We used to do this together. Let's do something different. And we've done it ever since.
Yeah, I think there's something fun with it. There's lighthearted competitiveness. It brings people together. There's surprise, but like controlled surprise. I think that makes it a safe option for grievers. It's not going to knock the wind out of you in the same way maybe a different kind of gift exchange would if you were trying to continue that tradition. That's interesting.
I know when you said that, I was like, that's what my family did as well. And around the same time, too, just a few years earlier than you. Maybe it was the thing to do.
Maybe that was the cool thing. When we think about the holidays, let's talk about emotions a little bit. What are some of those feelings that can come up during the holiday season?
I see a lot of anxiety, sadness. I do see a lot of guilt. I know we just shared about like new traditions, but I've seen guilt about continuing the holiday season without their loved one, creating those new traditions and feeling guilty that we used to do it this way. Will this person feel differently depending on what your beliefs are? Guilt of holding that enjoyment and happiness while also grieving. I've also seen a lot of anger, whether that be anger that a loved one isn't there, anger. I'm thinking about the kids I've worked with that now have to split their Christmases. I think a lot of times we try to package to kids like, oh, now you get 2 Christmases or 2 Hanukkahs or 2 Thanksgivings. And it's just really stressful. And really, a lot of times what kids want is their family together. With kids, I see anger, more acting out behaviors. What other emotions do you see come up a lot during the holidays?
I think the anxiety one's pretty big because it's almost like you're on winter break. You're not going to be in your normal routine and rhythms. There's that unpredictability. If you've had, I'm just going to use the word magical Christmases in the past, and now this year's going to look different. There's anxiety about, am I never going to feel that way again? Who am I going to be with? Even for our littler ones, is Santa going to find our house? And some confusion
Yeah.
about what should I be feeling? Like all of
Mhm.
this societal expectations to feel a certain way, or my friends are feeling this way, so I should feel this way.
Mm.
My colleagues are feeling this way or doing these things, so we should do that too. And it's like this pressure to keep going through the motions, even if it doesn't feel authentic or right, but like we should, because that's what's
Mhm.
expected of us. And so I think there's that cognitive dissonance, that misalignment.
Absolutely. When you were talking about will Santa find me, it brought up this memory years ago when I worked psychiatric inpatient, and I worked Christmas Day, and we only had 2 kids on the unit, but one was very little. I had totally forgot about this memory until you just said that, and that was one of his biggest concerns. Will Santa be able to find me at the hospital? And Santa did find him at the hospital. But yeah, that's a real worry for a lot of kids, of just whether it's Santa or something else. If there's a special treat or a special cake, who will bring that? Or if I have to be at this house, will I have this certain meal? So I think the confusion part that you just brought up is very real, whether you're a kid or an adult.
We like rhythms and routines, and
Mhm.
grief, there isn't a rhythm or routine to it. There's
No.
nothing linear about it. And you don't know if you're going to have a grief burst hit while you're in the middle of ice skating or at a holiday Christmas party, and suddenly I'm not okay and I have to leave. And you can't predict if
Mhm.
that's going to happen or where it's going to show up. And that's hard.
Absolutely.
So, in thinking about these different events, these different social dynamics, what do we think are some practical strategies or even mantras people can use as they think about entering this holiday season from that grief space?
My first thought in the holiday seasons, especially when you're grieving, is setting boundaries and knowing your limits.
Yeah.
When you said mantra, I don't know why this came up, but it's what came up. I can only do as much as I can, because sometimes when we think we're going to have a great day, and then, like you said, grief will just hit you out of nowhere, and sometimes you can't live up to the shoulds you were talking about. So I think entering the holidays, I always say, yes, they can be magical. They're also very stressful for
Yeah.
anyone.
Yes.
And then you add grief on top of that, and it's even more stressful. Setting boundaries about what you can and can't do, whether that be boundaries around how many events you're going to attend or how much you can do for those events. Are you a person I can attend events and bring a fruit platter that I buy from the store?
Yep.
But if I'm asked to bake this big thing, I can't.
Yeah.
Giving yourself grace and flexibility when you need it. Taking breaks is really important, especially during those events. I go back to what you just said. You never know when grief's going to hit. You can expect to go into a holiday party and think, oh my gosh, I'm not going to last 10 minutes because I'm surrounded by people that remind me of maybe a loved one I lost. And then it's actually great. Or you can go to a work party thinking, I got this because this has nothing to do with the grief I'm feeling. And then a song comes on, or there's a certain food,
Or
and you're just, or a smell, exactly. And then you just feel like you're crumbling and want to curl up in a ball. And so creating space for yourself, whether that is taking a walk outside if it's feasible, because I know depending on where you are, it might be really cold. Another favorite thing that I recommend, and people have mixed feelings about it, but finding ways that you could celebrate or honor, especially if it's a loved one that has gone on. Some people hate that and they're like, it's too hard, but other people, you might want to make a favorite dish or play a favorite song. I think there's so many practical things people can do. It comes down to figuring out what works for you and what doesn't, and giving yourself that grace and flexibility to be like, this worked for me this weekend, but the next weekend, not so much. Because my grief looks different today than it did last week.
One of the things I like to do with my clients, I like to have them pre-draft a text response in their phones, in their notes, and save that in advance. Hey, I'd love to come to this. with where I'm at with my grief. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to make it that day. So I'm a tentative RSVP yes, and I will
I
confirm.
love that.
And more often than not, the host is fine with that. It gives them permission to be like, okay, I planned this and that doesn't mean that I have to go. The other thing I really like to do is I encourage them to take bathroom breaks. So
Yep.
if you're at a social event, pick a song or record yourself giving you a pep talk, listen to that in the bathroom and just breathe and ground yourself for a couple minutes. You can always say, I got to use the restroom if you feel overwhelmed because you don't know how many spoons you're going to have that day, how much capacity you're going to have for that social event. The one either you're bracing for and then it's like, oh, I made it through and I was okay and stayed, or it's the sneak attacks where it's, I'm out, I'm gonna do the little Irish goodbye and I'm gonna leave and follow up with colleagues or whoever it is I'm with the next day. But I think the pre-drafted texts are really helpful, especially doing it before the holidays so you have it on standby.
I love that. When you just said the Irish goodbye, another thing that I have talked to clients about, it really depends because most of them are kids or teenagers, but if they do drive, is driving yourself to these functions so that you can leave on your own terms.
Yes.
Or if you drive with someone, communicating with them ahead of time, like, hey, if I say I need to go, we need to go, because there's nothing worse than getting stuck somewhere you don't want to be because your ride is not leaving.
Absolutely.
But if you're in the midst of grief and somewhere you don't want to be, feeling overwhelmed and maybe bathroom breaks aren't working or you can't go outside, or then people are trying to talk to you and you're trying to like put on this brave face when you just want to go home and be in the comfort of your bed, it can be really hard. So if you are able to drive yourself to holiday functions so that you can leave on your own terms, I think is another practical.
I also love the idea of giving yourself permission to say no to the big family gathering. And if there's one or two family members you want to see, ask them for coffee beforehand. You can go, say hello, and leave. And you got to have that quality time with one or two of the people you were really looking forward to see, or maybe that had flown from out of town and you were able to make it work for you. Or maybe you have them come to your home because you don't want to get dressed up and go out. It's okay to give yourself permission to do things different and to make your own rules for this. I've worked with a number of clients who loathe the holidays and loathe the joy and the cheer, and they're just angry. They have very limited BS tolerance for the cashiers saying, oh, how are you this holiday? Then I hear them in the next session and they're just like a Aurorasaurus. Because it's, if one more person asks me how am I doing this,
how I'm doing,
season, we work on distress tolerance and figuring out what's going to be the best fit for you in this season. You get to make your rules for that.
Absolutely.
In a similar vein of gatherings, like when we think about how family and friends can support us when we're in that grieving space over the holidays, what do you think are some helpful phrases for when someone's stuck in the grief space during the holidays?
I think something like, how can I best support you? Or is there any tangible help I can provide? Because a lot of people will go to, how are you feeling? And that's not helpful. It's more like, I've noticed that this season is really hard for you. How can I best support? Is there anything I can bring to you? This isn't necessarily a phrase, but like for the family members on the receiving end, I think it's important to know that if somebody who is grieving does set boundaries and say, no, I cannot attend that event, it's not personal. It might be personal, but generally speaking, it's not personal to you. And I think getting upset that people are saying no or setting those boundaries is not helpful. So if a loved one is like, going back to your text message, hey, in my season of grief, I'm not sure if I can make it, responding with kindness and compassion. Thank you for letting me know. We hope to see you there and understand if you can't make it. Let me know how I can best support you. If someone who is grieving decides to show up to a holiday party that you're hosting, ask if there's anything that would be helpful in the environment. that could help them with their grief. Whether it's like, I'm thinking family members, if there's a loved one who has passed, maybe asking, is there anything you want to do to honor or celebrate that loved one? Or would you rather us not touch that topic? Or if it's a work gathering and somebody has just recently gone through a divorce or lost a partner or a child, asking them, is there anything that would make you feel more comfortable here? If there's certain people you want to make sure we put you with that you feel safer or more comfortable with. Because I don't know about you, but when I've been in a season of grief, the last thing I want to do is small talk with people.
In thinking of if you're going through a divorce during the holidays, and being intentional with what language you're using.
Or with
some people just don't have awareness of how painful some of the holiday stuff can be when you are in a divided home situation,
Absolutely.
in a parenting situation, and that there's going to be, yes, missed things for the kids that you're working with, but also from the adult standpoint, there's a lot of complicated grief around the familial dynamics changing over the holidays. And some people need to be more mindful and intentional, especially in a work party or a family gathering. Maybe I don't want to talk about that. Being intentional with your words is really important.
I love that, because even well-intentioned people, if you use the incorrect language or language that does not come across as compassionate and as more investigative, it can strike a nerve. And I know in seasons of grief, we are more attuned and sensitive to tone, because obviously we have this big thing on our mind and our heart, and maybe we're in a time we want to talk about it, and maybe we're in a time that we don't. But yeah, asking like, oh, where are the kids? It's that I'm currently going through this divorce. Or people that I've seen this happen at family gatherings. Oh, how's your partner? And it's actually did you not get the memo?
Right.
And then it's
through the family phone chain.
Yeah. I've been in situations, especially with a death loss, that people bring up, I'm so sorry for your loss, over and over. While that might be nice to hear for many people, and I've been given this feedback from clients and friends, that's not what they want to hear. I want to hear that it sucks and that's really hard. I'm here for you. I don't need to hear just, oh, sorry, they were a great person. Yeah, I know that.
Or maybe they weren't.
Or maybe they weren't. But I think that goes back to the small talk and how friends and families can support. Even maybe asking, like, hey, I know you plan on coming. Are there things you want to talk about and things you don't? And
do you need me
maybe
to
there's you have run interference, or there's few key people.
With that one chatty aunt who just puts her foot in the mouth over and over again. Do you need me to help run interference? Because sometimes well-meaning family, it's like the curiosity is causing more harm and it's painful. And the small talk at family gatherings with the people we see twice a year, that's not necessarily when I want to open up those vulnerable parts that are grieving.
Absolutely.
And I'm thinking too about things for family, depending on circles of support. We have listener friends, distraction friends, doer friends. If you're someone who likes to do, if you feel uncomfortable with grief and you want to do stuff, text like, hey, you want me to come decorate your house? Or do you want me to do it for you? Do you want me to come put your lights up? Do you want me to send my partner over to put your lights up? Practical tasks can be helpful. Hey, I know our kids have a cookie thing for their class. Like, I made too many. Did you have a chance to make any yet? Do you want me to send some extras over and your kid can bring those to school? Like offering the tasks or offering options, like, hey, we're having lasagna or we're making tacos. Which one would you prefer? Because I'm going to bring you some food. I think
absolutely,
at least around the holidays, maybe those action-oriented helps. There's maybe a little more space for those. And then you have the friends who can just like, hey, I'm bringing coffee and we're going to watch Hallmark movies and be bumps on the couch.
Yeah.
And if you'd rather watch Thrasher movies, that's fine too. If you don't feel like watching a Hallmark movie, like, cool, let me know what you want to watch. I'm bringing coffee.
Absolutely.
But I think almost inviting yourself in, because sometimes it's too hard when we're grievers to ask, like the burden of the asking, the decisions that we're already having fatigue around, that can be hard. So not forcing friendship if there's pushback, but hey, I'm going to do this. Do you want it today or tomorrow?
Absolutely.
I would even imagine with the pediatric population too, like younger friends. Like, how do I know my friend's hurting or their parents are separating? Like, how do I show up for them? Do I want to invite them to distract? Do I want to ask them ice skating or going to the school festival? Can we be your ride?
I've definitely found, whether it's divorce, a death, or working in a hospital, like some type of chronic illness or hospitalization, kids just want to be kids. At the end of the day, in my experience working with hundreds of kids over the years, that helps them the most is doing things that just normalize being a kid.
Yes.
So yeah, it is, oh, yeah, our school's having this play. I don't have a ride, like given a ride. Or yeah, I want to go ice skating, or yeah, I want to hang out. I hear that so often in the hospital, whether it's around holidays or other big things like homecoming and prom. The thing that makes the kids in the hospital feel the best is when their friends come to visit and they just get that sense of being a kid. So yeah, if you're a parent and have kids and one of your kids' friends is going through grief, offering to do activities, come over to our house. I can be the ride. Just give them a sense of normalcy, because kids are resilient. And at least in my experience with grief, they'll grieve, have their moment, and then they want to move on to the next thing. Not because they're not grieving anymore, but they've had their time. That was enough for the morning. Now I want to go play outside, and we should let them do that.
I love that about kids so much. Like, Strobe and Shoot have the oscillating model for grieving, and it's about doing grief work and restorative work and moving back and forth between those two spaces. And that's a really good premise for grief work. Kids are excellent models of this. It's like they name it, oh, I'm sad, or I miss this, or I'm upset about that. Can I have a popsicle? Can I go play at Tommy's house? It's jarring for parents at times, but really it's they've just hit their capacity and they want to go do something that makes them feel like a kid, feel normal, just back in that routine. And then they'll oscillate back into the sad or the grief, and they know they need a break, even if they don't have the words to say that.
Yep. Oh, I see that all the time. So many memories are coming to mind of siblings of my patients, and they'll come, my patients in the ICU, they cry, they ask all the questions about, are they going to be okay? And then they look at mom and dad and be like, can we go down to the food court now? They're good. That's what they wanted.
And we make space for that.
Absolutely.
So when we think about people who might feel isolated or alone during the holidays, whether for a death loss, a divorce, being in the hospital, what suggestions do you have for finding that connection and support during the season?
So I know this is hard when you feel isolated or alone, but if there are those couple people that you can reach out to, I also encourage support groups. I was part of a survivors of suicide group after my cousin died by suicide. And during the holidays, even though the group always ran and wasn't specific to the holidays, when you're in that holiday season, you can find a support group and just have that space to know that you're not alone in your grief, even if your lived experience isn't the same. So whether it's a death due to cancer, a divorce group, or parents of child loss or sibling loss. And the beautiful thing about online is, even if there's not a local chapter, you can find connectivity in the online space. Obviously, therapy, if accessible, can be helpful. I do want to point out, if you want to be alone during the holidays, that's okay too. I don't want you to isolate yourself for weeks or months on end, but if this holiday season, my grief is just so overwhelming, and I think on whatever day it is, Thanksgiving, Christmas, Hanukkah's multiple days, but Kwanzaa's multiple days, New Year's, the best thing for me in my grief is to stay home and watch some movies and just have some time to myself with my dog. I'm just painting a picture here, but that's okay too. And I think we need to give permission and space for that as well.
I love that. We all get recharged in different ways. Our needs are different. Our grief is unique to us, to each type of loss. And yeah, sometimes it's going to feel better to be on our own, to isolate, to if we know we're going to be super grumposaurus, like I don't want to be around people. I don't want to expose them to that. I need to feel that. I can't curtail it to make someone else more comfortable. So I'm going to choose to be by myself and feel what I'm feeling. I'll reemerge in a day or two and reconnect through text or a call or go back to work on Monday, whatever it is. And I think you're absolutely right. Like it's okay to give yourself permission to just be alone and honor that's what you need. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So what about self-care? When we think about self-care, just maybe a couple practical ideas for self-care during the holiday season.
My first one's going to be boundaries, which I know we already said. I think a really important thing during the holiday season, because there's so much extra on our plates in general. And once again, then we're adding grief, is as much as possible, stick to your routine. Like if you love your 6 a.m. yoga class, still go to that.
Yeah.
Make sure you're getting adequate sleep. I know these all sound like basic things like brush your teeth, nourish your body. But I think in the holidays, we are so thrown off because there's so many events going on, so many things. It's easy to get off. If you're grieving and you're not doing those basic things to care for yourself, and then you're trying to do all this extra stuff, it's going to be overwhelming. Your grief is going to feel even more overwhelming. You may even question, why can't I handle this? I'm not actually doing the basic things I need, like sleep, doing my exercise, movement, like all of those things. This goes into boundary setting, but knowing your limits, recognizing how can I tell my grief is getting too much for this situation, and what will be my out? Or is it saying ahead of time, I know I can only do 2 events a week, so if I get invited to a third, that's too much? Or is it giving space for, hey, I can come, but I can probably only stay an hour, and the hour's up, you get out. But if you're feeling better, not. But I think knowing your limits is also taking inventory of how grief feels for you in different circumstances, and when is it getting too much that you feel like you need to take that time and space, whether that be the bathroom break that you talked about before or leaving.
I like making those care ahead and aftercare plans. Okay, if I know that I'm going to have a big social event, I'm not going to plan something the night before. I'm going to go to bed early and make sure I'm going to go to that 6 a.m. yoga class because that makes me feel grounded. And then I'm not going to plan something for early the morning after, or I'm going to meet a friend to walk, to process through and nourish myself. But making those before and after plans, especially like bigger gatherings, you can feel like you're bracing for impact almost. Someone's going to ask you about the divorce, ask you about your loved one, like all those activating questions that happen from small talk. So how do we make those caring for ourselves beforehand and after plan, the bookends? I think that's important to remember.
I completely agree.
In thinking about, because you work in hospital settings and you see how that impacts different families, how would you say that shows up within traditions for being in a different place this holiday, and like how that grief looks?
I have seen families bring traditions to the hospital if they have to be in the hospital on a holiday that they celebrate, whether that is, we've seen families pack up full Thanksgiving meals and bring them to the hospital, or Christmas and presents, or during the holidays. Honestly, at the hospital, we have a lot of families decorate the rooms, whether that be getting a mini Christmas tree or a menorah. I've also seen families do small things and then say, this holiday wasn't the same, so we're going to start a new tradition. It's the Tuesday after Christmas, we're going to open our presents. It just depends on the family and what feels best for them. Also, depending on the situation with their child and how much the child can engage. I forgot about this until right now. I had a client years ago that their family brought one present every day for a period of a couple weeks. So every day he got to open a different Christmas present. At home, they would just open them all together, but they decided we'll do one. So it's one positive thing to look forward to each day. Then he had something to do and engage in the hospital. I think traditions, and I know we talked about them at the beginning with our white elephant, also require flexibility. I think that's a theme with grief. Figuring out what works for you and what might work one year doesn't feel right the next, and that's okay.
You can always go back to a tradition if that feels, just because
Absolutely.
you stop it one year, we get so stuck in that concrete language that if you're going to do a tradition, you have to do it the same way every year for it to stay a tradition. There can be flexibility or even curiosity that, okay, this doesn't feel good this year. Maybe next year it'll feel different and we can reinstate it. You can give yourself permission to change the rules.
Absolutely.
All right. So as we start to wrap up, what would you say are 2 or 3 important takeaways when you think about grief and the holidays?
Grief can come at unexpected times. The way you think you might grieve may look different. So if you get through the holiday season and you're feeling better than you thought you would, that's okay. If you're feeling worse than you thought you would, that's okay. And if it's that up and down, that's okay. I also think it's important, and this is more globally, that everybody grieves different. And so I'm thinking of family once again. And if there was a death loss in the family, don't compare your grief to your siblings or cousins or aunts, because everybody grieves differently. And if you're going through a season of grief, don't judge yourself for the way it comes up for you. And if that looks different than others around you, because I think it's so easy to be like, okay, why do I cry all the time and feel like this mess where everybody around me looks like they're handling this well? Or vice versa. Why is everyone around me crying and I'm like, I can't even shed a tear? So I think, especially thinking of death loss and grief, and if it's a family loss and you're around family, just know that comparing yourself and your grief journey is not going to be helpful for you, and everybody grieves differently.
Jessica, this has been such a great conversation and so helpful. Is there anything that you were hoping we would touch on that we haven't covered today?
I think we've covered a lot in this time. This has been a wonderful conversation. I feel like we covered a lot, and I just appreciate you having this conversation with me.
I feel honored getting to have this conversation and bringing more light to different ways grief can show up. And I think the divorce piece, the hospital piece, I think they're so important because it's a different kind of loss.
Yeah.
And it's not always things that we chose to happen, like they just happened. How do we navigate the grief, especially when people are super celebratory with the holidays and there's all those shoulds, and we're in a different season, a different space, and get to take care of ourselves during that.
Yeah, absolutely.
What are the best ways for people to connect with you? And do you have any upcoming projects you want to talk about?
So Instagram, TikTok, and Threads are my most active social media. It's all at Jessica Leigh, PhD. Leigh is Leigh. And on my Instagram, I have a link to everything else. No upcoming projects. You can listen to Psych Talk, currently on a slight hiatus, but I have over 200 episodes there. So you can have plenty of time to...
So amazing. Over 200
to listen.
So much.
Yes, but nothing upcoming as of right now.
Thank you so much for this conversation. And listeners, thank you so much for listening in. Remember to be kind to yourselves today and kind to yourselves for this upcoming holiday season. Take care.
Bye.
That's all for today's episode of Grief is the New Normal. If today's conversation resonated with you, I invite you to share it with someone who might need it. And if you're looking for more support or resources, feel free to head over to The Morning Movement, where we continue to build community and normalize these hard, beautiful parts of life. I'm Dr. Heather Taylor, and until next time, be kind to yourself. Opening and closing music is provided by the Datacorns. If you're interested in being a guest on the podcast, collaboration, or training opportunities, feel free to email me at hello@griefisthenewnormal.com. And podcasts are also now available streaming on YouTube.